They said she was just the maid. But when Trent ripped open her locker, even the break room fell silent. Inside, a folded flag, still lemon-scented, cradled like something sacred. Letty, Claver 63, just kept wiping the same brass railing. Ever seen a quiet person carry more honor than the ones in charge? Trent posted the new staffing list beside the water cooler, pinning it flat with a pair of magnets shaped like eagles. He didn't make eye contact with anyone, didn't clear his throat like he normally did before a policy update. He simply left it there and walked off his shoes, clicking too quickly for the linoleum to catch up. I stepped out of the copier room just in time to see the sheet. My eyes followed the bold header, Phase 1 External Reallocation Review. Letty Claver's name was the first on the list. I paused. One beat. Maybe two. And then I moved on. No words left my mouth. Not to Trent, not to anyone. I don't know why. That silence has clung to me ever since, like the smell of bleach after closing time. Trent muttered something as he walked by me later that morning. We've got to modernize. Sentiment has no ROI. He said it like it was gospel. Not to me directly, but it hung in the air like printer toner. Back in the hallway outside facilities, Letty was wiping down the brass handrail on the old east staircase. Nobody asked her to do it. The new cleaning protocols only called for quarterly touchpoints on non-traffic surfaces, and this wasn't even on the spreadsheet. But there she was, working the rag in slow, deliberate circles like someone polishing a violin. Her body didn't show much tension, just patience, the kind you don't notice until it's missing. I watched her fold the rag carefully, after finishing folding it square like a letter and tucking it into the front pocket of her apron. She never looked up. I didn't say anything. The morning slipped by under dull fluorescent lights. The hum of the air handler drowned out most hallway noise. When I checked my inbox, Trent's memo had arrived. Subject line, Staff Optimization begins. Clean formatting, clear bullet points. Terms like phase forward resource usage and cultural consolidation made it sound like we were closing a spreadsheet, not a chapter of someone's life. Down near the reception desk, two of the younger admin temps were murmuring over coffee. One of them whispered she's still using the old lanyard from before the 2010 merge. The other smirked like it was an inside joke. I knew the lanyard they meant. Gray-blue frayed along the edges with a faint crimson logo stitched near the clasp, the pre-consolidation badge back when we were just the Henderson County VA Center. She'd been wearing it since I first transferred here. No one else's had survived this long. Later, I stepped out to the courtyard to clear my head. The air smelled like wet mulch and dusted leaves. Across the brick path, I saw Letty pushing her custodial cart, 3 tiers, metal wheels, a small radio duct-taped to the handle. From it, an old hymn trickled out, barely audible. Something my grandmother used to hum while folding towels. She passed me without noticing. Her stride was even slow, but not hesitant. I caught myself wondering, did she always move like this, or had I just never looked? I didn't know much about her. Some said she used to be a nurse. Others said her late husband was a Marine. Her employee record didn't say much, just Tier C Maintenance Aid ID 000478LC. That's it. Everything else was blank or expired. Around noon, I walked past the memorial alcove, the quiet corner with bronze plaques for our veterans who'd passed on. Letty stood there alone. The light from the tall east window made the dust in the air shimmer. She wasn't wiping anything, just standing with her fingers lightly pressed against one name, Corporal Isaac R. Bell. I didn't recognize it. A friend, a relative. She didn't cry, didn't speak. Just pulled out her cloth and began to clean. Soft strokes, precise, the kind of care you'd give to something fragile like bone china. You could barely hear the cloth on metal, only a gentle scratch like leaves brushing against a window. Then she folded the rag again, even slower this time, matched the corners like origami, slipped it back into her apron. I stayed at the doorway watching, and I thought, when I'm gone, who's going to wipe down my name? She left the alcove as silently as she'd entered. No eye contact, no nod. When I stepped into the space behind her, the wooden floor squeaked under me. But when she walked on it, it hadn't made a sound. That chilled me more than it should have. By late afternoon, the admin wing had emptied. Fluorescence buzzed above as sunlight turned amber outside. I sat at my desk, reopened the staff list. Her name was still there, unchanged. No one had replied to the memo. No one had said her name aloud. They just talked about cleaning services like it was a vendor contract. My name wasn't on the list. That should have brought me comfort. But it didn't. They reassigned Letty to overnight shifts the following week. No memo went out, no announcement. Just a new name on the midday log sheet and a different kind of silence in the hallways. At first it was nothing obvious, just a small smudge on the main front door. It stayed there the entire Monday, right at eye level, a pale print from someone's left hand. By Wednesday, there were more of them, rows of faint, oily crescents like quiet fingerprints of neglect. I stood there at 7:13 a.m., holding my coffee, staring at the glass, and realizing no one else saw it. The new cleaning team, contracted through an outside agency, were younger and faster. They wore neon green vests and earpieces moved in sync like part of a system. Efficient, yes. But they never looked up when passing you in the hallway. Never nodded at the older veterans who sat reading under the west windows. They cleaned, but didn't see. Room B, the physical therapy prep suite, had always been stocked with folded tissues and cooling cloths, one of Letty's little rituals not listed in any manual. Thursday morning, I reached for a tissue and got only air. The cubby was empty. On the counter, a single plastic-wrapped pack of generic paper napkins had been dropped, still unopened. I pulled one out, too thin, too dry, the kind that left a dust film on your hands. I refolded it slowly and placed it back. An older Marine named Rick, double knee replacement, stopped me near the PT desk that afternoon. "Did they change the soap?" he asked, sniffing his hands. "Smells like the ICU in here now." I nodded but didn't know what to say. The old wood lavender cleaner had a warmth to it. This new stuff, sharp chemical, the kind that prickles your throat. I hadn't noticed until that moment. That same day, I passed by the janitor's closet behind the West Wing loading dock. The door was ajar. Inside, the light flickered, catching off the edge of a metal mop sink. I stepped in, drawn by something I couldn't explain. Pinned to the corkboard above the sink was a tattered schedule sheet. Dust had started to settle on its edges. Most names were printed in fresh ink, but near the bottom I saw faint pencil markings: LC. Twos, Wed, Fry, 9-3. I leaned closer. The handwriting was careful, old-fashioned cursive. Letty's. There was a small dot next to her name. Not a star, not a check mark, just a dot. It felt like a footprint in dry cement. The mop leaned against the wall, its handle worn smooth where a hand would have gripped it 100 times. The air still carried the faintest trace of her cleaner, an echo of citrus and brass polish. I stood there for a moment too long. A cart rattled by in the hallway and broke the spell. By evening, I found myself back at my desk, the glow of the screen soft in the dim office. Trent had just sent another update, Phase 1 successful. Words like streamlining and load optimization crowded the text. None of it mentioned Letty or anyone else. I opened a new email. To tmosby@hsvc.gov. Subject: re-staffing adjustments. The cursor blinked. I typed Trent. Have you noticed the front doors lately, or room B? I stared at the sentence for a long time. Deleted it. Typed again. Have you spoken to Letty since the shift change? Backspaced that too. My fingers hovered, then settled into my lap. Outside, the parking lot was half lit. The reflection of the front glass doors shimmered in the distance, fluorescent strips flickering in their panes. For a moment it looked like someone was wiping them down. But when I leaned forward, there was no one there. I was at the vending machine outside the medical wing, deciding between salted almonds and a bag of pretzels when I heard her voice behind me, dry, clipped, unmistakable. You remember Letty Claver before the badge, right? I turned. Dr. Arlo Labcoat creased at the elbows, rolling her battered supply cart with one hand and sipping black tea from a steel thermos with the other. Her glasses hung low on her nose, her eyes razor-sharp behind them. 74 this year, and still carried herself like a major on rounds. I blinked, unsure how to respond. She didn't always fold towels, you know, she added, not waiting for an answer. Some of us still remember what she folded before that. Her words fell like stones into a pond, ripples widening inward, not out. Arlo parked her cart beside the wall and glanced at me over the rim of her cup. There was a flag, she said softly, Fallujah 2006. Widow was 19, barely knew how to breathe without him. The Marines handed her a triangle so crisp it looked pressed by memory. Letty was the one who folded it. I saw it with my own eyes. I shifted my weight. The hallway around us hummed with old lights and the occasional beep from a vitals monitor down the corridor. I watched as Arlo adjusted the strap of her cart, revealing a trail of dust where the wheel had etched along the baseboard. That same dust had settled into every corner of the wing lately. She was with us that winter, Arlo continued, unofficially. Triage volunteer, back when rules bent for compassion. She gave me a look, one brow lifted. You've worked here longer than most. You telling me you never wondered I tried to recall Letty before her janitor's badge. But I only ever saw her with the mop, the bucket, the rag folded just so. I opened my mouth, then closed it. Later that day, back in my office, I sat at my desk, staring at the personnel database. I typed Claver into the search bar. No results. I tried Letty. Nothing. The only entries were post-2012 standard custodial records, shift logs, ID renewals, safety trainings. All tidy, all surface level. Something kept tugging at me. A shape without a name. I got up and walked to the old filing cabinet in the corner, the one marked Maisk. 2000s. Its wood veneer had bubbled from decades of dry air, and the drawer stuck slightly when I pulled. Inside a mix of faded manila folders, dividers with torn labels, a dried-up ballpoint pen. I thumbed through the tabs until I hit one labeled Support Commendations, 2009. The folder was thin, almost empty. Inside, among a carbon-copied list of event volunteers and kitchen aides, was a half-folded sheet. The paper crinkled as I opened it. My eyes scanned the names, and there she was. L. Claver. Med Supply Assist Temp. 3 events. No title. No ID number. No contact info. Just a line fading into the page. I held the paper for a long while. The light from the hallway fell across it in stripes. Her name looked like it had been added as an afterthought, penciled in the graphite, smudged along the edge. But it was there. I sat down. She had always been there. We just stopped seeing her. I folded the paper and slid it back into the folder, then paused. Folded it again, this time into a tight triangle, a habit I didn't know I had until it was done. Later that evening, I walked past the janitor's closet again. The mop was gone. The corkboard was still there. A post-it note fluttered in the breeze from the cracked window, but I didn't read it. Instead, I turned toward the admin wing. Near the elevator, against the far wall, stood a narrow drawer cabinet no one used anymore. At the very bottom, in faint marker, someone had written Maisk. The letters were slanted, half-faded. I stood in front of it and felt something in me tip just slightly. A realization, or maybe a regret. Something was shifting, and it had been for a while. The janitorial staff room was quieter than usual that morning, but not in a peaceful way. The kind of quiet that hovers when people know something's about to break. Trent was already there when I walked in, standing stiff beside Letty's locker. He wore the same tailored blazer he always did for operations oversight days, though the hem of his shirt poked slightly from the back. His eyes were sharp and restless, like he was convincing himself this was routine. Sometimes he said loud enough for the junior staffer in the corner to hear, "You gotta air out old closets to keep things fresh." He turned to the locker. Letty was off shift, her overnights didn't start until 6 p.m. But the moment he tugged the Velcro strap off the lock bar, a sound snapped through the room. Not loud, but final. The rip echoed off the old tile and bounced down the hallway behind us. Someone shuffled their chair. No one spoke. Trent unlatched the door. The hinges creaked slightly. Inside, her items were few and carefully arranged. A rolled gray cardigan, a can of lemon polish, a lunch container wrapped in plastic still cool from the fridge. He reached in and pulled out a soft cloth bundle from the top shelf. His fingers hesitated. The cloth was dark navy folded into a triangle. 3 crisp corners, 13 stitched stars, a triangle so precise it looked like the edges were sealed with memory. Balanced on top of it, a small photo in a brass frame polished slightly bent at one corner. A young Marine stood in dress blues beside a woman in fatigues, both smiling. Sunlight slanted behind them like it was proud too. The light above flickered, catching off the photo glass. Trent blinked. He didn't say a word. No one did. The junior staffer leaned forward unconsciously, then pulled back. I stepped forward, slow like the room was full of glass. Trent still held the bundle, unsure now. His confidence frayed around the edges like an old ribbon. I could see it in his hand, the slight jerk as I reached out. I didn't snatch. I just lifted the flag from his grip, careful not to brush the photo frame. It was lighter than I expected, but carried something heavier than weight. I held it for a moment, then turned to Trent. "You don't touch things you don't understand," I said quietly. He didn't respond. I placed the flag gently back inside the locker, straightened the photo, closed the door, not slammed, not slow, just enough to return things to their rightful place. The junior staffer cleared her throat. Trent stepped back, rubbing the crease in his tie. No one said anything else. The room somehow had grown colder. Later, I sat at my desk with the staffing list open on my monitor. The names were still there. No edits, no reversals. Just columns and codes. Letty's line, row 18, still bore the red slash, external reallocation, pending. I stared at it for a long while. Then I clicked the highlighter tool, selected yellow, and filled the cell. The glow from the screen seemed brighter than usual. Letty wasn't on any schedule that day. Not the roster, not the system, not the agency's printed rotation list taped to the break room fridge. But there she was, bent gently at the waist, wiping the edge of the memorial display in the front alcove, moving with a rhythm that came not from duty but memory. The lemon oil caught the light as she worked, its scent curling under the sterile smell of ammonia and polymer floor wax that had soaked into the building since the contractors took over. The contrast was sudden, like a photograph pulled from an old box, a softness where everything had gone bright and hard. It was early spring, and the atrium's glass roof diffused the weak sunlight into long white patches across the tiles. Trent had walked through earlier that morning, clipboard in hand, rehearsing for the quarterly compliance inspection. His steps were sharp, his attention precise. "This whole wing passes white glove now," he said to no one in particular. Finally. The floors gleamed. The air vents had been vacuumed. Even the baseboards, usually scuffed with wheelchair nicks, looked touched up. But then a veteran named Joel, Vietnam-era, paused near the entrance and tilted his head. "Why's it smell like bleach these days?" he asked me, voice low. "Used to smell like home." I didn't answer. Later that afternoon, I passed the memorial alcove again. I wasn't trying to find her. But there she was, moving as if she'd never left, as if her cloth and her hands had stayed folded in the dark and were simply being unwrapped now. She worked in silence. No humming, no swaying, just that firm, circular motion of the cloth across etched bronze. She leaned slightly on one foot, adjusting as she traced over each name. Some she paused at, some she didn't. The lemon oil softened the air between names. I leaned against the wall near the corridor, letting myself breathe it in. "Smells like someone cares," Joel whispered from behind me. I hadn't heard him approach. She skipped a name near the bottom. Her fingers hovered there longer than they had for the others. Then she moved on. I didn't need to lean closer to see it. Claver M. Sergeant Hal, 1965 to 2006, her husband. She was saving him for last. On the breast pocket of her faded gray uniform, not a company-issued shirt, just something soft and old, was a faint shape beneath the fabric, the outline of a folded cloth, perfectly pressed. She didn't need to wear it to tell the story. Just having it there said enough. I stayed until she finished the last name. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. The quiet stayed with me as I walked down the hallway. The kind of quiet that wraps around you, not emptiness, but fullness, held close. Back in admin, Trent was reviewing air filter logs, tapping a red pen against the plastic binder. He didn't look up when he spoke. "Don't let sentiment get in the way of systems," he said flatly. I paused at the doorway. Didn't answer. Not yet. The commandant arrived early. Not just punctual early, as if time bent for men like him. The air changed with his presence. He moved through the front doors without ceremony, but somehow everyone stood straighter. His uniform was sharp enough to slice tension rows of medals aligned like an honor guard down his chest. His walk was quiet but purposeful, like each step held memory. Trent caught me near the admin desk, adjusting his tie with the confidence of a man who had rehearsed both hand gestures and sound bites. "You know the type," he muttered. "All they care about is metrics, not mops." He clutched his laminated inspection overview like it was a holy relic. I didn't answer. I was watching the commandant's eyes. They weren't darting like a bureaucrat's. They were reading corners, ceilings, shine angles, smudges invisible to most. I'd seen that look before in the field. It wasn't about surfaces. It was about what's been missed. We began the tour. Trent narrated every corridor like a real estate agent, data dashboards, janitorial app integrations, badge-in timestamp logs. The staff had been briefed to nod and smile. Floors gleamed. Air vents bore fresh filters labeled by date and initials. Even the trash bin linings had been rotated and retucked. "Efficiencies up 27%, Trent said. "We're exceeding contractor benchmarks for sanitation." The commandant nodded. "Once." We moved through the therapy wing, the old nurses' station, even the auxiliary storeroom Trent had painted last week. Then we reached the memorial alcove. It's not much, just a curved recess off the chapel barely wider than a pair of wheelchairs. But its stillness made it feel larger, older. There, under the soft light of a stained glass window, the walls bore the names of service members linked to the center, etched into bronze and wood. I caught it before the others, the scent. Beneath the sterile sharpness of commercial cleanser, something softer lingered. Lemon oil. Not sprayed, not dumped. Rubbed in. Intentional. Letty had been here. We all stepped inside. The air hushed around us. The commandant went to the far wall without pause. He stood before the corner case, a glass panel housing a photo, some medals, and a tightly folded flag in a triangle. 13 stars out. Corners precise. His gaze locked there. He didn't speak. I glanced sideways. A subtle reflection shimmered in the case's frame. Not mine. Hers. Letty stood just beyond the chapel archway, her figure partly blocked by a coat rack. Not hiding, not revealing. Just present. Hands clasped. Shirt pressed. A soft cloth just peeking from her pocket. Like a nod to an old ritual, the commandant's gloved hand rose. It stopped just short of the glass, hovering over a name etched lower than the rest, Clyburn Lieutenant Michael D. He didn't need to say it. We all saw. His throat moved once. He stepped back slowly, then turned, eyes steady, now settled, as if something unfinished had quietly clicked into place. "Who maintains this room?" he asked. Trent inhaled slightly, but I was faster. "Letty Claver," I said. The name landed like a small stone dropped into still water. The commandant held my gaze for a long second. Then, with the slightest turn of his head toward Trent, he said it. "Keep her." Another pause. "Double her hours if she'll stay." And with that he turned, moved out through the arch without a backward glance. Silence lingered. Even Trent didn't speak. His mouth opened closed. I watched him for a moment. His hands twitched slightly, one still clutching his laminated spreadsheet. The corner of the plastic dug into his thumb. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. Instead, I turned back to the alcove. Letty was gone, but the scent remained. The flag in the glass case sat as it always had, still, folded, waiting. But now someone had finally seen it. I found her at the Hendersonville bus terminal, platform 3. She was early. Of course, Letty never missed a schedule, even one without a clock in. She sat alone on a bench so sun-worn the grain had started to curl, her cleaning bag slumped beside her boots. Half of a sandwich rested in her lap, wrapped in wax paper torn at one edge. She hadn't taken a bite. There was no coat, no suitcase. Just the weight of a woman used to carrying things no one else could. She didn't look up right away. I stood a few feet away, watching her shoulders rise and fall in a rhythm both weary and still. The bus hadn't arrived yet. Maybe it was late. Maybe it was on time. "Morning," I said, quiet. She turned her head. Not surprised, not smiling. Just acknowledging. "It's not about being remembered," she murmured. "It's about leaving it clean." Her voice cracked a little, not from emotion, I think, but from disuse. She'd been gone 2 weeks, and in that time the center felt like someone had wiped down all the surfaces, but left the air stale. "I figured you might be here," I said, lowering myself onto the bench beside her. The wood creaked. A crack ran along the plank under us, thin and dark, patched by someone with a loop of twine and epoxy. I noticed how her fingers were folded over each other, mirroring the cracked grain, as if holding it together just by being still. I reached into my coat pocket, and pulled out the small object I had carved. It was a frame, unfinished pine, sanded smooth, no back, no picture. Just space. I made this, I said, offering it gently. It's for whatever you think should go in it. She didn't take it at first. She looked at it the way you look at something too fragile to be real. Then, with slow hands, she unzipped her bag. From inside, wrapped in the faded cloth of an old apron, she drew out the flag. That same one. Triangle folded edges, sharp but softened with age. She laid it across her lap, and for the first time I noticed her hands tremble not from weakness, but from reverence. With painstaking precision, she unfolded it. Corner by corner, crease by crease, she opened the symbol of everything she never talked about. The stars breathed in the morning light. A faint citrus scent rose, lemon oil still clinging. She ran her fingers along the edges, smoothing them flat. Then, without speaking, she began folding again. Slow, methodical. Every turn tighter than the last until it came back to its triangle. This time she pressed the final fold with the heel of her hand and let out a long breath. The bus pulled in. Brakes hissed. A seagull called overhead. The driver stepped down and called out, "Final boarding, Charlotte route." I said nothing. I wasn't there to convince her. She held the flag for a moment longer, then slid it carefully into the empty frame. It didn't quite fit. The corners stuck out a little, but she didn't mind. She adjusted the cloth until it rested comfortably in the wooden space. She turned to me. If I come back, she asked, eyes steady, do I still get to wipe the names? I didn't smile, just nodded. Once. Her lips curled, not a smile, not exactly. More like a crease in something long folded. Then, without drama, she tucked the framed flag into her tote and rose. Across the street, I saw a familiar figure standing near the coffee kiosk. Dr. Arlo. She didn't wave, didn't cross, just gave the barest nod. The kind of gesture shared between people who know more than they're ever asked. Letty turned toward the bus, then stopped. "I'll be in early," she said, and then she walked, not rushed, not slow, just her into the waiting sunlight. The memorial garden opened without a microphone. No raised voices. No official declarations. Just a folding table near the gate holding 2 pitchers of lemon water, some napkins and a guest book no one was required to sign. It had rained the night before. The earth held onto its moisture with dignity, beads of dew still clinging to the tulip petals that lined the brick walkway. The names etched low into the brass rim around the garden gleamed subtly under a morning sun that filtered through newly planted dogwoods. I arrived earlier than I meant to, or maybe I needed to. I'd brought the wooden frame again, the same one Letty had returned to me 2 years ago blank. I hadn't put anything inside it, not because I hadn't tried. Photos, ribbons, dried ferns, even a copy of the old schedule with her initials scribbled in pencil, I'd held them against the wood. None fit. When I reached the seating circle, people had already gathered. Quiet conversations, shoes scuffing gravel. A group of elementary students filed in, led by a young teacher pointing out birds nesting in the hedgerow. A boy in a striped hoodie tugged her sleeve. "Who's the lady in the green sweater?" he asked. She squinted toward the west side of the garden. "That's Letty," she said. "She keeps this place warm." He nodded as if that explained everything. And maybe it did. Letty moved with a pace that suggested she didn't believe in ceremonies. She wasn't part of the formal committee, wasn't listed on any document. But everyone let her through. Her green sweater had grown a little baggier since last spring. Her hair was still pulled back tight, but thinner now, touched more with gray. She carried a small tin watering can and made her way flower to flower plant, to plant like she always had, with precision and care, not performance. Near the southern edge of the garden was the new exhibit alcove, a simple brick wall curved slightly inward, housing a single display case under shatterproof glass. Inside was a folded American flag, tight and sharp-edged, nestled into a velvet backing. A faint lemon scent lingered around it. There was no label, no name, no plaque inside the glass. Only the flag. A few visitors stood there, hats removed, eyes soft. One elderly man leaned on his cane, whispering to his daughter something I couldn't hear. But I watched her reach out and gently touch his hand. Above the case was a brass plate, modest, quiet, to those who kept it clean and kept it sacred. No organizational seal, no committee acknowledgement. I saw Trent near the gravel turn. For once, he wasn't in control. His hands were in his pockets. His jaw clenched loosely like he wanted to speak, but had finally learned not to fill the air. He had offered to give opening remarks earlier in the week. The committee said no. Now he stood with the rest of us, eyes shifting from Letty to the crowd, to the flag, and finally to the small plaque. She approached the case slowly. From the pocket of her cardigan, she drew a daisy, small, fresh, the petals barely curled. She didn't hold it up or announce it, just bent, placed it gently beneath the case and stepped back. No applause, no music, but a few heads bowed. One veteran saluted briefly, then let his arm fall naturally, as if the gesture had unfolded on its own. Letty turned and walked toward the east gate. She didn't linger. I stood and followed a few steps behind the frame still in my hand. I didn't call out to her. Didn't need to. We had said what needed saying back at the terminal. She stopped beside a bench under the dogwoods, one of the new ones. The wood still smelled of fresh varnish, but someone, probably her, had left a patch of linen on the seat to keep it from scorching in the sun. She sat patting the cushion once before lowering herself. I sat beside her. Neither of us spoke. She watched the children tracing the names along the path. A girl pointed to a name and mouthed it syllable by syllable, guided by her mother's finger. In the background, the sprinklers clicked on again, that soft sweep and hiss filling the air. "Never thought they'd get it right," Letty said quietly. "They didn't." I answered. She looked at me, brows raised. "They just stopped trying to get it wrong." She let out a soft laugh, just air and understanding. I turned the frame in my hands. Still blank, still light. "I still don't know what to put in this," I said. "Maybe nothing," she replied. "Not everything needs to be filled to mean something." The wind brushed through the trees. A breeze passed the glass case again. The flag inside didn't move, but the light glinted along its crease like a breath. Somewhere behind us, a child giggled, tripping over a garden stone and catching themselves. The moment broke the solemn air just enough to feel human again. Letty rose. She didn't say goodbye. Just nodded the way people do when the job's not done, but the hardest part is. I stayed a little longer. Held the frame in both hands, rested it on my lap. Maybe the frame wasn't meant to contain an image. Maybe it was meant to hold space for the work no one saw, for the acts, without speeches, for the people like Letty, who never needed an audience. Maybe this stillness, this silence, this garden, was the message. Final reflection. The wind barely moved the flag behind the glass, but I felt it, a quiet shift in the air, like the world remembering something it had once overlooked. We didn't need speeches or medals. Sometimes reverence grows best in silence. Letty never asked for recognition, just a clean bench, a folded name, and a garden left better than she found it. I've come to believe not all heroes stand tall. Some bend low, mop in hand, and leave legacies only the still-hearted can feel. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? If this story touched you, feel free to share your thoughts or subscribe for more stories that honor the quiet among us.